So in the last video, we talked about background checks, which are very, very important, and we left off on mental background checks. And on page 72, and we actually provided a video that talks about mental background checks as well. It's a very strong topic for our paper right now. But basically it says, I'm reading 72, the second paragraph. It says, according to one study, nearly 90% of all disqualifying mental health records were omitted from the system, a problem highlighted in 2007 when Sung Kui Cho, a 23-year-old who had been diagnosed with various mental disorders, passed a background check and bought 2 guns from a dealer and used them to kill 32 people in a rampage at Virginia Tech University. So essentially what that's saying is there was a shooter who killed 32 people at Virginia Tech, and he passed a mental background check. And what this is saying is that 90% of the people who are taking mental background checks are passing through, and I think that's frightening, that's scary. Now, I'm going to also play devil's advocate because you're going to have to write a concession. Now, I honestly believe that more mental background checks with guns it's necessary. We need to do this. That's my belief. However, I think it's a lot harder to do than it seems. So for example, mental health has a wide scope. And so for example, if you're depressed, if you just got divorced, if you just lost your job, should you not have a gun, or should the police come to your house and take away your gun? So some of you guys would say yes, some of you guys would probably say no, that depression is something you could overcome and it just takes time and you should still be able to have a gun. Another argument, if you look at the video, this is a concession. This is a very radical argument. It's not my argument at all. However, they say that most people who have mental illness are more likely to have a crime committed against them than for them to commit a crime. So if mentally ill people are likely to be exposed to a crime, why shouldn't they be able to have a gun? The Second Amendment says shall not be infringed. These are counters, or it could be your argument as well, depending on how you stand on this topic. Also, in terms of mental illness, a lot of the shooters that they've caught, they'll try to plead insanity, but they have a hard time getting that plea. So, for example, James Holmes, the guy who shot up a Colorado movie theater, he shot 70 people. He dressed up like the Joker. He was not able to get the insanity to plead. They said that he was completely logical. He was in his head, that a crazy person wouldn't think like this. It was too planned out. He bought 2,000 rounds of ammunition on Craigslist. He had body armor. He had a smoke grenade. He did all of these things, and people who are mentally ill, they don't think that precisely. So I think and the counter argument is a normal person doesn't shoot 70 people. I get that too. I'm just trying to present points and counters. I think this is a good argument. I think that we should have more mental background checks. If you want to own a gun, fine, but they should make sure that you don't have any history of schizophrenia and things like that. However, I just remembered this. Part of the issue with tackling mental health as well is this, that sometimes you may not be diagnosed with mental illness until later in life. So for example, you may not get schizophrenia until you're 20, 25 years old, 30 years old. So you could be 18 years old to buy a gun, and you may not realize you have schizophrenia until you're 25, 30. So I think on a level, yes, we should be doing this, but on a deeper level, this is a lot harder to do than we would imagine. And so those are a lot of really strong points and counters. Let's see. Last time we had a book about teachers and guns. I'm going to go over a couple arguments that aren't necessarily in the book, but they're good arguments to bring up. Let me find it. The book talks about this. It talks about teachers having guns, and we're in community college. I don't know your thoughts on this. I talked to some people say that if we arm teachers, then the amount of shootings would go down. I really question that. I don't know how you guys would feel if I came in the first day of class with a shotgun. I'm just carrying it around and saying, you guys need to do the readings. I think I would be afraid. I think you guys would be afraid. That would be a very intimidating environment to be in. And also, teachers do crazy things in classrooms. We hear stories all the time about teachers doing something crazy. So I don't know if we want teachers to have guns, and I think that's a fair argument. You could argue that teachers should have guns. I think that's a fair argument too, depending on how you look at it. I brought this up with a friend, and he said that if his second grade teacher would have had a gun, she would have shot him, which is a funny joke, kind of a dark joke, but a funny joke. But I don't know if we want to have teachers to have guns. I think that could be frightening in a school situation. I think maybe having armed people outside or security guards could work. However, a counter for that would be they had a shooting in Florida a couple years ago. There was an armed security guard outside, and he never went in because he was too afraid. So just because you have armed people doesn't mean they're going to stop shootings. So those are a couple points and counters that you'll see loosely written in this chapter. Another part of this chapter really gets into militias. And I know we have a lot of international students in this class. I've worked a lot with international students, and I hear these stories where parents are afraid to send their children to the United States because we have so much violence. There's a story about an immigrant who went to New York and he got lost and he didn't talk to anybody for 3 days because he was too afraid. So we hear stories like that. And the United States just has way different gun laws than other countries. If you own a gun in some countries and you have a gun club or something like that, you're going to get in big trouble. But in the United States, it's completely fine. And page 85 really gets into militias. And I also have a video that explains what militias are. And I think it's important to look at that, one, because in the Second Amendment, it talks about militias. And according to George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, a militia was the armed people. If I had a gun, I would be the militia. You would be the militia if you had a gun, technically, because America did not have a standing army. So the people were the militia. And then today, it's changed where anybody could form a militia. If you have a group of people who have guns and they want to go out and train and hunt, you could do it. And sometimes they get a little bit more radical. Some of the groups we see in the video are very, very radical. But technically, according to state constitution or national constitution, they're able to do these things. And I think it's fair to question that. I also think these are some good paper topics to get into. And then lastly, one other thing to mention would be page 87, where it says that a lot of gun owners want gun control. And gun control means making it harder on guns. Down at the bottom of 87, it says, according to a recent study by National Opinion Research Center, 72% of gun owners support background checks and a 5-day waiting period for gun purchases. So 72% of people who own guns want background checks. 66% support extending background checks to private sales and closing the gun show loophole, as we talked about in the other video. They want that closed. So if you sell a gun, you have to do a background check. And then 79% support mandating gun safety courses for gun buyers. So if you buy a gun, you should be trained on how to use a gun. So a lot of people who own guns want training. They want background checks. They want these things. So I think that's an important thing to note too. I also think a very good topic for this paper, and it's a good one, is that if you want to get a gun, you should be trained on how to use that gun. I know that other countries, what they do is they have inspections every year where they inspect your gun, they say if you still have your gun and things like that, and they make you go out and show that you could shoot your gun. So I think that something like that could be, I think it's a great paper topic, bluntly, and I also see a lot of students write about this topic. So I covered chapter 3 and 2 videos, and there's a lot in this chapter. There's a lot that you could use for your essay. We have so many arguments, and remember this, you just need 3. Thank you.